The plebeian Omega was mocked by all, until the Alpha King bowed before her and their unborn pup. They called her Mud Girl, not because of her name, which was Lyra, though few bothered to remember it, but because she spent her days in the clay pits at the edge of the territory, digging pottery clay with bare hands that never quite came clean. She was plebeian born, the lowest rank in the Silvercrest hierarchy, daughter of a seamstress who had died in childbirth and a father who worked himself to death in the mines. Lyra had no wolf, no shift, no connection to the divine energy that coursed through proper pack members. She was Omega without teeth, without claws, without worth beyond the labor her hands could provide. The upper ranks barely saw her. The middle castes stepped around her like she was an obstacle rather than a person. Even other plebeians kept their distance, as though her particular brand of worthlessness might be contagious. But Lyra had learned to find peace in small things. The feel of cool clay between her fingers, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from earth and water and patience, the morning light that turned the river gold, caring nothing for hierarchy or rank. She was kneeling by the water's edge, washing clay from her arms, when she heard the commotion from the upper village. Horns, drums, the organized chaos that meant someone important had arrived. Lyra paid it no mind. Important people had nothing to do with her world. She returned to her work, shaping a bowl on her crude wheel, humming a song her mother had taught her before dying. Something about the moon, loving all her children equally, even the ones the world forgot. She didn't notice the massive shadow that fell across her workspace until a voice spoke. "You're singing the old hymns." Lyra's hands froze. She looked up slowly, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. A man stood before her. Not just any man, an alpha, and a powerful one. She could feel it radiating from him like heat from summer stone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes the color of storm clouds. Scars marked his face and arms, telling stories of battles she couldn't imagine. He wore no crown, but she knew royalty when she saw it. Everything about him screamed authority, power, the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Her voice came out cracked. She swallowed and tried again. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone, my lord." "You didn't." He moved closer, studying her with an intensity that made her want to shrink into the earth. "That song, where did you learn it?" "My mother, before she." Lyra gestured helplessly. "It's just an old song, nothing important." "It's a coronation hymn," he said quietly, "from 300 years ago. Most packs have forgotten it entirely." Lyra said nothing. What could she say? That her mother had been obsessed with the old ways, had filled her childhood with stories of when pack meant family instead of hierarchy? That would sound like criticism. Like sedition, like the kind of dangerous thinking that got plebeians exiled or worse. The alpha crouched beside her, bringing himself to her eye level. The movement was so unexpected that Lyra actually flinched. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lyra, my lord. I work the clay pits." "I'm Theron." He studied her face with that same unnerving intensity. "And I'm not your lord. I'm just visiting." Visiting, right. As though alphas of his caliber just wandered down to the plebeian quarters for casual conversation. "I should return to work," Lyra said carefully, not wanting to offend but desperate to escape whatever this was. "The overseer gets angry if the quota isn't met." "Of course." But Theron didn't move. He watched her hands as she returned to shaping the bowl, his expression unreadable. "You have skilled hands." "Thank you, She caught herself. "Thank you." "Do you ever make anything for yourself? Or is it all for the quota?" The question was so unexpected that Lyra laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Plebeians don't keep things for themselves, my sir. Everything goes to the upper houses." "Everything?" "Everything that matters." Something flickered in his eyes, anger perhaps, or pity, Both felt equally uncomfortable. "That should change," he said quietly. Then he stood, nodded once, and walked away, leaving Lyra staring after him with clay-covered hands and a confusion that felt dangerously close to hope. She didn't know that Theron Ashencroft was the Alpha King of the Northern Realm, traveling in secret to inspect territories that had grown corrupt under negligent leadership. She didn't know he was searching for something he couldn't name, a reason to believe the system he inherited was worth preserving. She didn't know that their brief conversation had just rewritten both their destinies, but the moon knew. The moon always knew. And high above, hidden behind afternoon clouds, she smiled. Theron returned the next day, and the day after that, always at dawn before the overseers arrived, always with that same quiet intensity that made Lyra's heart race for reasons she didn't understand. He would watch her work, ask questions about the old songs she hummed, about the stories her mother had told, about how she survived in a system designed to grind people like her into dust. On the fourth morning, he brought bread. Real bread, not the hard grain cakes plebeians subsisted on. "You shouldn't," Lyra protested, but her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. "Eat," he said simply, settling beside her on the riverbank. "Tell me about your mother." So she did. Between bites of bread that tasted like heaven, she told him about a woman who had believed the old ways could return, who had taught her daughter that worth wasn't determined by rank or wolf or the ability to shift, who had died giving birth to a stillborn son, taking her dreams with her. Theron listened with an attention that felt almost painful, as though her words mattered, as though she mattered. "She sounds wise," he said when Lyra fell silent. "She was a dreamer. Dreams don't feed hungry children." "Maybe they should." Lyra looked at him sharply. "You speak like someone who's never been hungry." "You're right." He met her gaze steadily. "I've never gone to bed wondering if there would be food tomorrow. I've never had to choose between dignity and survival. I've never been invisible simply because of the circumstances of my birth, but—" He paused. "I'm beginning to understand that the system that gave me everything took everything from people like you. And I'm beginning to think that's not strength. That's just cruelty with a crown." The words hung between them, dangerous and electric. "You shouldn't say such things," Lyra whispered. "Even thinking them is necessary," he interrupted gently. "If anything is going to change." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Theron stood, brushing dirt from his clothes. "I have to leave tomorrow. My business in this territory is complete." Something dropped in Lyra's chest, which was absurd. She barely knew this man. He was so far above her station that their brief conversations were already more interaction than she deserved. His departure should mean nothing, but it felt like everything. "I hope your travels are safe, my sir." "Theron," he corrected. "Please, just Theron. Safe travels, Theron." He started to walk away, then turned back. Would you like to walk with me? Just for a little while, before I go." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. Plebeians didn't walk with men like him, didn't presume, didn't reach for things so far beyond their grasp. But something about the way he asked, uncertain, almost vulnerable, made her nod. They walked along the river as the sun climbed higher, talking about nothing and everything. He told her about territories he'd seen, about the northern lights that danced in winter, about cities built from white stone that glowed under moonlight. She told him about the clay, about how earth and water could become art with enough patience, about the small rebellions of creating beauty in a world designed to extract only utility. When they reached the bridge that marked the boundary between plebeian and merchant quarters, the line she had never crossed, Theron stopped. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for these mornings, for reminding me what I'm supposed to be protecting. I didn't do anything. You existed. You survived. You kept your mother's songs alive in a world that tried to silence them. That's everything. He reached out, and before Lyra could process what was happening, he took her hand. His thumb brushed across her clay-stained knuckles with a gentleness that made her throat tight. "I'll remember you," he said, "Lyra of the clay pits, who hums coronation hymns and makes beauty from mud." Then he released her hand and walked away, crossing the bridge into a world she could never follow. Lyra stood there for a long time, her hand still tingling where he'd touched it, her heart aching with the loss of something she'd never really had. She didn't see him again. But 6 weeks later, when her monthly bleeding failed to come, when morning sickness drove her to her knees by the river, when the impossible truth settled into her bones like stone, she finally understood what those dawn conversations had cost her. She was pregnant, carrying the child of a man whose full name she didn't know, whose world she could never enter, whose very existence had been a brief, beautiful anomaly in her gray life. When the overseer noticed her condition, when word spread through the Plebian quarters, the mockery began in earnest. Mud Girl had gotten herself pregnant, probably by some wandering merchant, probably sold herself for bread, probably thought a bastard pup would elevate her station somehow. The cruelty was relentless, the isolation was complete, and Lyra, for the first time since her mother's death, wept not because the world was unkind, but because it had given her something precious only to make sure everyone knew she didn't deserve to keep it. 3 months into her pregnancy, they cast her out. Not officially. The Silvercrest Pack didn't exile plebeians. They simply made conditions so unbearable that leaving seemed like mercy. The overseer cut her rations in half. Her shelter was reassigned to a younger worker. Other plebeians, afraid of association, refused to speak to her or share food or acknowledge her existence beyond necessity. Lyra survived on scraps and the clay work no one else wanted, the menial, backbreaking labor that paid almost nothing. Her belly swelled despite malnutrition. Her body ached constantly. But the pup inside her remained strong, kicking and moving, a fierce little life that refused to surrender even as the world tried to crush them both. She built herself a crude shelter in the forest beyond the clay pits, just canvas and stolen wood, but it kept out most of the rain. She foraged for roots and edible plants, remembering lessons her mother had taught her about survival. She kept working because stopping meant starvation. Even as her pregnant body screamed for rest she couldn't afford, the mockery followed her everywhere. Upper caste women would bring their daughters to point and whisper, using her as a cautionary tale. "That's what happens to girls who forget their place," they'd say, loud enough for Lyra to hear. "That's what happens when you think you're more than you are." Lyra endured it all with the same patient silence she'd learned as a child. Survival meant being invisible. Fighting back only made things worse. But at night, alone in her shelter with her hands on her swollen belly, she would sing the old hymns to her unborn pup. She would tell stories about a mother who had believed in something better. She would promise that somehow, some way, this child would know love even if the world offered nothing but cruelty. 4 months pregnant, she collapsed in the clay pits. The overseer found her unconscious, half submerged in muddy water, and simply stepped over her to check the day's quota. A merchant's wife eventually pulled her out, not from kindness, but to avoid the inconvenience of explaining a dead plebeian to the territory administrators. Lyra woke in a healer's tent, which would have been a miracle except that the healer refused to actually treat her. "Resources are for pack members," the older woman said coldly, checking Lyra's pulse with clinical detachment. "You're technically pack, but—" She gestured at Lyra's swollen belly. "That pup has no father claimed. That makes it— and you, essentially rogues. I can't waste medicine on rogues." "Please," Lyra whispered, her voice hoarse. "I just need something for the fever. Something to make sure the pup— Should have thought of that before spreading your legs for whoever fathered that bastard." The healer packed away her supplies. "You'll survive or you won't. Nature has its own way of handling mistakes. She left. Lyra lay in the tent, burning with fever, her hands protective over her belly, and for the first time seriously considered that maybe she wouldn't survive this. Maybe the world was right. Maybe she had reached too far, hoped too much, been too foolish to believe that someone like Theron could have genuinely cared for someone like her. Maybe this was her punishment for forgetting her place, but the pup kicked, strong and insistent, refusing to give up even as Lyra's body tried to surrender. "All right," she whispered to the life inside her. "All right, we fight, we survive, we don't give them the satisfaction of being right about us." She crawled out of the tent at dawn, fever still raging, and returned to work. Because that's what survival looked like in her world, enduring past the point where endurance should be possible, living past the point where life should end. 5 months pregnant, a young beta named Cassia found her gathering wild roots in the forest. "You're that Omega," Cassia said, not unkindly. "The pregnant one everyone talks about." Lyra said nothing, braced for more mockery, but Cassia surprised her. "My mother was cast out when I was young. Different circumstances, but I remember what it was like, how cruel they can be." She held out a bundle, bread, dried meat, a blanket. "I can't do much. If anyone knew I helped you, they'd make my life hell, but you shouldn't have to do this completely alone." Tears burned Lyra's eyes. "Why?" she managed. Cassia shrugged. "Because someone helped my mother once, just enough to keep us alive until we could help ourselves. I figure maybe that's how kindness works. You pass it forward when you can." She left before Lyra could thank her properly. It wasn't much. One act of quiet defiance against a system designed to isolate and destroy. But it was enough to remind Lyra that not everyone had forgotten what compassion looked like. She ate the food slowly, savoring every bite, and sang louder that night to the pup in her belly. Because if one person could remember mercy, maybe others would too. Maybe there was still hope, however small, that they would survive this. She didn't know that 800 miles away, in the capital city of the Northern Realm, Theron Ashencroft was going mad with guilt and longing. She didn't know that he had returned to Silvercrest twice already, searching for the woman with clay-stained hands and old hymns, only to find that no one knew, or would admit to knowing, anything about a Plebian Omega named Lyra. She didn't know that he had started unraveling the corruption in his territories, specifically targeting systems that allowed plebeians to be treated as disposable. She didn't know that he was coming back, but he was. And when he found her, when he finally understood what his absence had cost her, the entire realm would learn what happened when you threatened what belonged to an Alpha King, even if she didn't know she belonged to him yet. And now I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. 6 months pregnant, Lyra's body finally surrendered. She collapsed during the harvest festival, that cruel celebration where upper castes gorged themselves while plebeians served and cleaned and pretended gratitude for the scraps they were thrown. She'd been carrying water jugs up from the river, her swollen belly making balance nearly impossible when her vision simply stopped. She came to in the dirt, water soaking her dress. A circle of disgusted faces looking down at her. "Get her out of here," someone said. "She's ruining the festival." "Probably faking for attention," another voice added. "These lower ranks always do." No one helped her up. They simply walked around her, stepping over her body like she was debris the wind had blown in. Lyra lay there, hands on her belly, feeling the pup's frantic movements. Alive, still alive despite everything. She didn't cry. She was beyond tears, beyond shame, beyond everything except the animal need to protect the life inside her. She crawled. Actually crawled on hands and knees back to her forest shelter, leaving a trail in the dirt that probably satisfied everyone who saw it. Proof that Mudgirl had finally been ground down to where she belonged. That night, in her canvas shelter, with rain leaking through holes she was too weak to fix, Lyra felt the first real contractions. Too early. 2 months too early. Panic seized her. "No," she whispered to her belly. "No, please, not yet. You're not ready. We're not ready." But her body didn't care about readiness. Pain ripped through her in waves, each one stronger than the last. She needed help, needed a healer, needed someone, anyone. But who would come? Who would risk their reputation to help the pregnant outcast everyone had decided deserved her suffering? Lyra screamed into her blanket, trying to muffle the sound, trying not to give the pack the satisfaction of hearing her break. And then, impossibly, Cassia was there. "I heard you from the path," the young beta said, her face pale but determined. "I'm not a healer, but my mother taught me some things. Let me help." "You'll be cast out too," Lyra gasped between contractions. "If they know you helped me, then they'll know." Cassia's jaw set stubbornly. "I'm tired of letting cruelty happen just because it's easier than fighting it. Let me help." What followed was the longest night of Lyra's life. Contractions that felt like her body was tearing itself apart. Cassia's inexperienced but gentle hands trying to ease the pain. The terrifying certainty that her pup was coming too soon, too small, too fragile to survive in a world that already hated them both. Dawn was breaking when the pup finally arrived. A girl, tiny and perfect and terrifyingly still. "No," Lyra sobbed, taking her daughter in trembling hands. "No, please, please breathe, please." Cassia rubbed the pup's chest desperately. "Come on, little one, come on." Nothing. The tiny body remained limp, and then Lyra did something instinctive, something that came from a place deeper than conscious thought. She began to sing, not just any song, the coronation hymn, the one Theron had recognized, the one her mother had taught her, claiming it had power older than their understanding. Her voice was broken and raw, but she sang every word her mother had made her memorize, sang while tears poured down her face, sang while her body screamed with exhaustion and pain. And the pup gasped, a tiny, furious sound. Then a wail that was the most beautiful thing Lyra had ever heard. "She's breathing," Cassia whispered, wonder in her voice. "She's alive." Lyra clutched her daughter to her chest, sobbing with relief so profound it felt like drowning in reverse. "You're alive," she whispered against the tiny head. "You're alive. You're here. You're mine." The pup's eyes opened, storm gray, exactly like her father's. In that moment, Lyra knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, she would die before letting anyone hurt this child. Second, somehow, impossibly, this pup was meant to survive, meant to live, meant to prove that plebeian blood could produce something extraordinary. "What will you name her?" Cassia asked softly. Lyra looked down at her daughter, this tiny warrior who had refused to surrender even when born 2 months early into a world designed to reject her. "Thera," she said. "It means free. She'll be free of all the things that tried to destroy us. I swear it." Outside, the festival continued. The pack laughed and drank and celebrated, completely unaware that something remarkable had just happened in a canvas shelter in the woods. A plebeian Omega had given birth to an Alpha King's daughter, and though neither of them knew it yet, the moon had just granted them both another chance at the destiny they'd almost missed. Theron returned to Silvercrest 8 months after he'd left. He came not in secret this time, but with full royal authority. His investigation into territory corruption had revealed that Silvercrest's administrators had been embezzling resources meant for lower castes, creating artificial scarcity that justified their cruelty. Heads would roll, literally. But first, he needed to find her, the woman with clay-stained hands and old hymns, the one who had shown him what his realm was supposed to protect and had instead been abandoned to. He'd sent messengers 3 times. Each had returned saying no such person existed, that there was no record of a plebeian named Lyra, that perhaps His Majesty was mistaken about the name, about the place, about the encounter itself. Theron didn't believe them. Couldn't believe them. His wolf had recognized something in her, something important, something meant. He'd been haunted by her face for 8 months, by the memory of her voice singing those old hymns, by the guilt of leaving her behind. So he came himself. The territory administrators greeted him with false smiles and prepared lies. The upper castes bowed and scraped. The plebeians cowered and avoided eye contact. "I'm looking for someone," Theron announced to the assembled crowd. "An Omega. Her name is Lyra. She worked in the clay pits." Silence. Uncomfortable, shuffling silence. "No one by that name," an administrator finally said. "Perhaps His Majesty—" "She sang the coronation hymn," Theron interrupted, his voice hard. "She had clay under her fingernails and a mother who believed in the old ways. Someone here knows her. Someone tell me where she is. Now." More silence, but Theron caught it, the way some plebeians glanced toward the forest, the way the overseer's face tightened with something that looked like guilt. "She's gone, Your Majesty," the overseer said carefully. "Left the territory months ago. We don't track rogues." "Rogues?" Theron's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You're calling her a rogue?" There was an incident, a pregnancy out of bonding. The shame of it." Theron's world tilted. "She was pregnant?" "Disgraced herself," the overseer continued, not reading the rage building in the Alpha King. "Probably ran off to hide her bastard pup somewhere. Good riddance, honestly. That kind of moral failing." Theron's fist connected with the overseer's jaw before conscious thought caught up with instinct. The man went down hard, blood spattering the festival platform. The crowd gasped. Administrators rushed forward, uncertain whether to defend their colleague or prostrate themselves before their king. "Where is she?" Each word was bitten off, barely controlled fury making Theron's wolf surge dangerously close to the surface. A small voice spoke from the back. "The forest. She built a shelter past the clay pits." Theron's head snapped around. A young beta woman stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Show me," he commanded. "Now." Cassia led him through the plebeian quarters, past the clay pits, into the forest where proper pack members never ventured. She explained as they walked. The mockery, the isolation, the near death in childbirth, the pup born 2 months early. With every word, Theron's rage grew. With every detail, he understood more fully how catastrophically he'd failed the one person who had mattered most. "She never said who the father was," Cassia added quietly. "But the pup has your eyes, Your Majesty. Storm gray, exactly like yours." Theron's steps faltered. His pup. He had a daughter, and she'd been born in a canvas shelter in the woods, while her mother starved because he'd been too blind, too careful, too convinced he needed to maintain propriety instead of claiming what his wolf had known from the first moment. They reached the shelter. It was even worse than he'd imagined. Canvas worn thin, holes patched with leaves. Barely large enough for one person, let alone a nursing mother and infant. "Lyra," Cassia called softly. "It's me. I brought someone." Movement inside. Then Lyra emerged, carrying a tiny bundle wrapped in what looked like her own tattered shawl. She looked up. Her eyes met Theron's, and the world stopped. She was thin, too thin. Her face was gaunt with malnutrition. Her hands raw and cracked, her clothes barely more than rags. But her eyes, those gray eyes that had haunted his dreams, still held that same quiet strength. "Theron?" Her voice was barely a whisper. You're the Alpha King," he finished, unable to look away from her. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have told you. Should have come back sooner. Should have. You're the Alpha King, she repeated, and suddenly she was backing away, clutching her pup tighter. And I thought you were just. I thought. Her face crumbled. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't see this. Please just go. Please. Lyra. I can't give you what you're entitled to, she said desperately. Can't let you take her from me just because your blood runs in her veins. Please, she's all I have. Please don't. Theron closed the distance between them in 3 strides, not to take, but to fall to his knees before her. The Alpha King of the Northern Realm knelt in the dirt before a Plebian Omega and their daughter, his head bowed, his hands open and empty. I'm not here to take, he said roughly. I'm here to beg forgiveness, to ask, not demand, to be part of her life, to make right what I've let go so catastrophically wrong. He looked up at her, and there were tears on his face. I'm here to claim you both, Lyra, if you'll have me. Not because of rank or law or tradition, but because my wolf knew 8 months ago what I was too blind to see. You're mine. She's mine. And I've failed you both so completely that I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm begging for one anyway. Lyra stared down at him, this powerful man kneeling in the mud before her, and something inside her that had been frozen for 8 months finally cracked. Her name is Thera, she whispered. It means free. Thera, Theron repeated, voice breaking on the name. May I see her? Slowly, Lyra knelt too, bringing them eye level. She pulled back the tattered shawl, revealing the tiny face beneath. Storm-gray eyes stared up at Theron, his daughter, his pup, perfect and small and alive against all odds. She's beautiful, he breathed. She's perfect. His voice broke entirely. She's ours. And there, in the dirt outside a canvas shelter that should never have existed, the Alpha King reached for his family and prayed to every god that would listen that he wasn't too late to deserve them. The entire territory witnessed what happened next. Theron stood, still holding his daughter carefully in one arm, and extended his other hand to Lyra. She took it hesitantly, and he pulled her gently to her feet. Then, with the entire assembly watching in stunned silence, he raised his voice, letting his alpha authority carry it across the gathered crowd. This is Lyra, he announced, his tone brooking no argument. Mother of my daughter, my chosen mate, your future queen. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Administrators paled. Upper caste women looked faint. But your majesty, one brave fool sputtered. She's plebeian. She has no wolf. She's the strongest person in this entire territory. Theron cut him off coldly. She survived 8 months of starvation, isolation, and cruelty while carrying and raising my pup alone. She kept the old ways alive when all of you forgot them. She showed more courage in her worst moment than any of you have shown in your entire privileged lives. His gaze swept the crowd with deadly precision. And if anyone questions her worth again, they'll answer to me personally. Silence, absolute, terrified silence. Theron turned to the overseer, who was still clutching his broken jaw. You're exiled, effective immediately. Take nothing but the clothes on your back, and be grateful I'm allowing you that much mercy. The overseer opened his mouth to protest, but Theron's growl silenced him instantly. He fled. The rest of you, Theron continued, addressing the administrators and upper castes. You have 48 hours to open your warehouses and distribute the resources you've been hoarding. Food, medicine, blankets, everything you've withheld from the lower castes while claiming scarcity. If I find a single plebeian still going hungry after that deadline, I'll personally strip every rank from this territory and start over from scratch. More stunned silence. Then slowly, people began moving, running, desperate to comply before the Alpha King made good on his threat. Theron turned back to Lyra, his expression softening instantly. I need to get you both to proper shelter. Food, a healer. I'm fine, Lyra said automatically, even though she clearly wasn't. You're not. His hand cupped her face gently. And that's my fault, but let me fix it now. Please. She wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some shred of independence. But Thera whimpered in her father's arms, and Lyra realized her pride was less important than her daughter's well-being. All right, she whispered. What followed felt like a dream. Theron carried Thera while his guards carefully supported Lyra, treating her like precious glass instead of disposable trash. They brought her to the territory's best inn, commandeered the largest suite, and summoned healers who actually treated her with respect, bordering on reverence. The head healer examined both Lyra and Thera with gentle thoroughness. The pup is remarkably healthy considering she was born 2 months early, the woman said with genuine admiration. And you... She looked at Lyra. You should be dead. The malnutrition alone should have killed you both. Whatever kept you alive was sheer will. And old hymns, Lyra murmured, exhausted beyond comprehension. Old hymns? The healer looked intrigued. My mother taught me, said they had power. Lyra's eyes drifted closed. I sang them when Thera wouldn't breathe, and she lived. The healer and Theron exchanged a significant look. The coronation hymns, the healer said softly, haven't been used in centuries, but the old texts say they could channel divine energy, blessing and protection for those the goddess chose. She looked at Lyra with new understanding. You might not have a wolf girl, but you've got something arguably more powerful. You've got the goddess's own favor. Lyra was too tired to process that. She fell asleep mid-sentence, her body finally surrendering to months of accumulated exhaustion. When she woke, it was dark. Candles burned softly around the room. And Theron sat beside her bed, Thera sleeping peacefully in his arms, his eyes locked on his daughter's face with an expression of such raw love that it made Lyra's chest ache. You're good with her, she said quietly. He looked up, and his smile was both joyful and heartbroken. I've missed 8 months. I'll never get that time back. You didn't know. I should have. His voice was rough with guilt. Should have claimed you properly before I left. Should have made sure everyone knew you were under my protection. Should have what? Lyra sat up slowly. Announced to everyone that the Alpha King had chosen a wolfless plebeian? They would have killed me the moment you left, Theron. Or worse. Then I should have taken you with me. Without asking, without explaining who you really were? He had no answer for that. They both knew the truth. There had been no good choices, no clean solutions, just a series of moments that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. What happens now? Lyra asked quietly. Theron looked at her steadily. Now I do what I should have done 8 months ago. I claim you both properly, publicly. I make sure every pack in the Northern Realm knows that you're mine and under my absolute protection. I can't be queen, Lyra interrupted. I don't know how to be royal. I don't know politics or protocol or any of the things queens are supposed to know. I'll embarrass you, weaken your position, make you look like someone who chose love over convenience. Theron finished. Good. Let them see that. Let them see an Alpha King who values strength of character over strength of bloodline. Let them see... His voice gentled. Let them see what I saw that first morning by the river. Someone real and true and worth building an entire kingdom around. Tears burned Lyra's eyes. You barely know me. I know enough. He shifted Thera carefully to one arm so he could reach for Lyra's hand. I know you're brave enough to survive what should have killed you. I know you're stubborn enough to keep singing to a pup who wouldn't breathe. I know you're kind enough to teach our daughter the old songs even when the world tried to make you forget them. His fingers tightened on hers. That's all I need to know. The rest we'll figure out together. People will say I trapped you, that I got pregnant deliberately to elevate my station. Let them. His jaw set stubbornly. Anyone who says that to your face answers to me. Anyone who says it behind your back will be exiled so fast they'll think it was divine intervention. Despite everything, Lyra laughed, a watery, exhausted sound. You can't exile everyone who gossips about your plebeian mate. Watch me. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She believed he would burn down his entire court system to protect her dignity. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. So am I. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. But I'm more scared of losing you again, of waking up one day and realizing I was too cautious, too political, too concerned with appearances to grab hold of the one real thing that's ever mattered to me. Thera stirred in his arms, making small noises. Theron looked down at her with such naked adoration that Lyra felt her last defenses crumble. All right, she whispered. All right, we try. We see if a wolfless plebeian can actually become queen. But if it doesn't work, if I make things worse for you, you have to promise you'll let me leave. Never. The word was absolute. You're mine, Lyra. Both of you. And I don't give up what's mine. Not for politics, not for appearances, not for anything. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and careful and full of promises he intended to keep. Outside, the territory held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen when morning came, and the Alpha King formally claimed a plebeian Omega as his mate. But inside that room, 3 souls who had been broken separately began the slow process of healing together. And high above, the moon smiled down on her chosen children and blessed what was about to begin. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The formal claiming ceremony happened 3 days later, once Lyra had regained enough strength to stand without swaying. Theron wanted to wait longer, but Lyra refused. Every day we delay gives people more time to organize opposition, she said pragmatically. Let's get it done before they figure out how to stop it. So they gathered in the main square, the entire territory compelled to attend by royal decree. Upper castes stood rigid with barely concealed horror. Middle castes whispered nervously. Plebeians watched with expressions ranging from hope to disbelief. Lyra wore a dress borrowed from the healer, simple blue cotton, nothing royal, but clean and whole and infinitely better than her tattered rags. Her hair was washed and braided. Her hands, finally free of clay stains, trembled slightly as Theron took them in his. Thera was held by Cassia, who had been granted the honor of standing witness. The young beta looked proud and terrified in equal measure. Theron had rejected the traditional claiming ceremony, too long, too focused on bloodlines and pack politics. Instead, he'd chosen something older, something that resonated with the hymns Lyra sang. I claim Lyra as my mate, he announced, his voice carrying across the silent square. Not because tradition demands it, not because politics require it, but because my wolf recognized her the moment we met, and I was fool enough to ignore that recognition for 8 months. He pulled a necklace from his pocket, not the ornate royal jewels a queen should wear, but something simpler, a pendant carved from moonstone, ancient and luminous. This belonged to my mother, he said quietly, fastening it around Lyra's neck. She told me to give it only to someone who understood that strength comes in forms the world doesn't always recognize, someone who could survive what should have killed them and still choose kindness over bitterness. His hands lingered at her throat. That's you, Lyra. That's always been you. Lyra touched the pendant with shaking fingers, feeling its warmth against her skin. I don't deserve this. You deserve everything, he corrected, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. Then he did something that made the entire crowd gasp. He knelt before her. The Alpha King of the Northern Realm, the most powerful wolf in 8 territories, knelt in the dirt before a plebeian Omega and bowed his head. "I failed you," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every witness. "I left you vulnerable. I allowed my people to treat you with cruelty when you should have been protected with my life. I let my daughter be born in poverty when she should have been welcomed with celebration." He looked up at her, his storm-gray eyes bright with unshed tears. "I beg your forgiveness, Lyra, and I swear on my life, on my crown, on everything I am, I will never fail you again." Lyra's vision blurred. Around them she heard shocked whispers, saw administrators looking faint, felt the weight of hundreds of eyes watching this impossible moment. "Stand up," she whispered. "Please, Theron, you're the king. You shouldn't. A king who doesn't kneel before the people who matter most isn't worthy of the crown." He interrupted. "My mother taught me that. I forgot for a while. You reminded me." He stood slowly, and before Lyra could process what was happening, he turned to face the crowd. "This woman survived what all of you tried to kill," he announced, his voice hard with barely controlled fury. "She endured mockery, starvation, isolation, and giving birth alone in the woods while you celebrated and feasted and congratulated yourselves on your superiority. She kept my daughter alive through sheer will when any lesser person would have surrendered. And now—" His arm wrapped around Lyra's waist, pulling her close. "Now she stands here as your queen, and you will show her the respect she earned through suffering you can't imagine and strength you'll never possess." Silence. Then, slowly, people began to kneel. Not all at once, not willingly. But they knelt because defying a direct command from the Alpha King was suicide. Lyra watched them bow, these people who had treated her like dirt for her entire life and felt nothing, no satisfaction, no vindication, just exhaustion and the desperate hope that maybe, finally, she could rest. "I need to feed Thera," she murmured to Theron. He understood immediately. "The ceremony is over," he announced to the crowd. "Return to your duties and remember what you witnessed here today." They fled, grateful for dismissal, desperate to escape the tension, already planning how to spin this scandal into something manageable. Cassia brought Thera over, the pup fussing with hunger. Lyra took her daughter gratefully, retreating to a quiet corner to nurse while Theron stood guard, his body a wall between his family and the world that had tried to destroy them. "What happens now?" Cassia asked quietly. "Now we go to the capital," Theron replied. "Introduce them to the court. Let the nobility meet their new queen and see their future princess." He glanced at Lyra, his expression softening. "And then we figure out how to build something better than what we inherited." "They'll fight you," Cassia warned. "The noble houses won't accept a plebeian queen easily." "Then they'll learn." His voice carried that dangerous edge again. "I'm done maintaining systems that crush the vulnerable to comfort the powerful. Lyra's existence proves that rank means nothing compared to character. And if I have to tear down every outdated law and rebuild from scratch to make people understand that, I will." Lyra listened to him plan revolution while their daughter nursed contentedly, and felt the strange dislocation of someone whose entire world had transformed in less than a week. 7 days ago, she'd been dying in a canvas shelter, convinced she and Thera would be erased from the world without anyone noticing or caring. Now she was queen, mother to a princess, mate to an Alpha King who seemed determined to remake his entire realm in her honor. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt terrifying. The journey to the capital took 5 days. They traveled in comfort Lyra had never imagined. A royal carriage with cushioned seats, frequent stops for rest and feeding, guards who treated her with careful respect. Theron rarely left her side, constantly checking that she had enough food, that Thera was comfortable, that the journey wasn't too taxing. "You're hovering," Lyra said on the 3rd day, not unkindly. "I'm compensating," he replied, adjusting Thera's blanket for the dozenth time. I have 8 months of care to make up for. You can't make up for lost time by suffocating us with attention. Watch me try. Despite her exhaustion, Lyra smiled. Theron's devotion was overwhelming but genuine. And after months of having no one, being the center of someone's universe felt simultaneously wonderful and frightening. At night, they stayed in territory guest houses, always the finest rooms, always treated like visiting divinity. Lyra would nurse Thera while Theron paced, dictating letters to scribes about reforms he wanted implemented, corrupt officials he wanted investigated, systems he wanted overhauled. "You're really going to do it," she said one evening, watching him work. "Actually try to change everything." "I have to." He looked at her intently. "Because if the system could do to you what it did, to someone innocent, someone who did nothing wrong except be born into the wrong rank, then the system is fundamentally broken, and broken things either get fixed or replaced. People won't like it. People rarely like change." He sat beside her, reaching out to stroke Thera's tiny hand. "But they'll adapt, or they'll find themselves without positions or territories or the protection of the crown. I'm done being a king who maintains injustice for the sake of stability." "You sound like my mother," Lyra said softly. She used to say the old ways valued people over hierarchy, that packs were supposed to be families, not military units. Your mother was right. Theron's expression was thoughtful. "And I'm beginning to think those old ways need to be new ways. That maybe we've spent centuries building systems that make us efficient but not good, strong but not kind, organized but not humane. That's a dangerous philosophy for a king." "Then I'll be a dangerous king." They reached the capital on the 6th day, and Lyra's first glimpse of the city stole her breath. White stone buildings that gleamed in the sunlight, towers that reached toward the sky like prayers made solid, gardens that bloomed impossibly in late autumn, probably maintained by magic she couldn't begin to understand. And at the center of it all, the palace, massive and magnificent and utterly intimidating. "That's where we live?" she whispered. "That's home," Theron corrected gently. "Or it will be, once you feel comfortable there." Comfortable seemed like an impossible dream, but Lyra held Thera tighter and reminded herself that she'd survived worse than intimidating architecture. The palace staff had been warned of their arrival, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality. Lyra saw their faces as she stepped from the carriage: shock, confusion, carefully hidden disdain. A plebeian queen with no wolf and a pup born out of proper bonding ceremony. She was everything their world said shouldn't exist. Theron's advisor, an elderly beta named Matthias, greeted them with stiff formality. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing to Theron. Then, with visible effort, "Your Majesty," repeated toward Lyra. "Matthias," Theron's voice carried warning, "you will address my mate with genuine respect, or you will find yourself retired by morning." The advisor's jaw tightened, but he bowed deeper. "Of course, Your Majesty, forgive my surprise." "Your surprise is noted. Your acceptance is required." They swept past him into the palace, and Lyra tried not to feel like she was walking into a beautiful prison. The royal quarters were overwhelming, rooms bigger than the entire plebeian district she'd grown up in, furniture that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. Servants who didn't quite know what to do with a queen who flinched when they tried to help her. "I can dress myself," Lyra protested when a maid reached for her borrowed dress. "But Your Majesty, please," Lyra's voice cracked slightly. I need a moment. Alone, please." The servants fled, looking relieved to escape the awkwardness. Theron found her an hour later, sitting in the nursery they'd prepared for Thera, her daughter sleeping peacefully in an ornate crib that looked like something from a fairy tale. "Talk to me," he said quietly, sitting beside her. "I don't belong here," Lyra whispered. "Look at this place, Theron. Look at these things. I spent my whole life sleeping on dirt and eating scraps, and now I'm supposed to just… What? Pretend I deserve silk sheets and servants and rooms with actual windows? You do deserve them. I don't know how to be this person. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know how to be queen, how to talk to nobles, how to make decisions that affect thousands of people, how to be anything except Mud Girl who got lucky enough to catch a king's attention. Theron pulled her close, and she collapsed against his chest, sobbing with the accumulated stress of the past week. You don't have to know everything immediately, he murmured against her hair. You learn, you adapt, you ask for help when you need it. And you remember that being queen isn't about knowing protocol or understanding politics. It's about caring what happens to people. And you've always done that, Lyra. Even when people didn't deserve your compassion, you gave it anyway. What if I fail? What if I embarrass you in front of the court? What if… Then we handle it together. He pulled back enough to look at her. You're not alone anymore. You have me. You have Thera. And you have something none of those nobles will ever possess. You understand what it's like to be powerless. That makes you more qualified to rule than anyone who spent their entire life cushioned by privilege. You really believe that? I really do. Lyra wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that somehow, impossibly, this would work. But the next morning, when she attended her first court session and felt dozens of noble eyes judging her every movement, every word, every breath, she understood exactly how hard this was going to be. An elegant woman with silver hair and cold eyes approached during a break. So you're the plebeian, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. The one who trapped our king with a convenient pregnancy. Lyra's hands clenched. I didn't trap anyone. Of course not. The woman's smile was poisonous. You just happened to get pregnant by the most powerful wolf in the realm through pure coincidence. How fortunate for you. Lady Morgana, Theron's voice cut through the conversation like ice. If you're quite finished insulting my mate, perhaps you'd like to explain why your family's territory has the highest plebeian mortality rate in the realm? Morgana paled. We're investigating. Investigate faster, or I'll find someone who can. He dismissed her with a look, then turned to Lyra. Are you all right? Define all right, she muttered. He smiled grimly. It gets easier. When? I'll let you know if I ever figure that out. They spent the next 3 hours listening to petitions, disputes, requests for royal intervention. Lyra said nothing, just observed and tried to understand the complex web of politics and obligations that governed pack law. But when a plebeian family presented their case, requesting justice for a son who had been beaten by a noble's guards for failing to bow quickly enough, Lyra couldn't stay silent. What happened to the guards? She asked quietly. The room went silent. Everyone turned to stare at her. The family's father shifted uncomfortably. Nothing, Your Majesty. Guards can't be punished for disciplining those who fail to show proper respect. He's a child, Lyra said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The report says he's 8 years old, and you're telling me that grown men beating an 8-year-old child to unconsciousness is considered acceptable discipline? More silence, uncomfortable, shifting silence. The law, an advisor began. The law is wrong, Lyra interrupted. She looked at Theron. Isn't it? He studied her for a moment, and she saw pride flickering in his eyes. Yes, he said firmly. The law is wrong, and it's changed as of now. No guard, noble, or administrator may physically punish a plebeian, child, or adult without judicial review. Excessive force will be prosecuted as assault regardless of rank. Gasps, protests, outraged voices rising. Theron's growl silenced them all. The Queen has spoken. I have confirmed it. The law is changed. Anyone who has a problem with this can bring their grievances to me personally, and I'll explain exactly why protecting children is more important than maintaining your ability to abuse those beneath your station. The court session ended in chaos. Nobles fled muttering. Advisors looked panicked, but the plebeian family bowed low to Lyra, tears streaming down their faces. "Thank you," the mother whispered. "Thank you for seeing us." That night, in their private chambers, Theron kissed her forehead gently. "You're going to be a remarkable queen," he said. "I just said what seemed obvious." "That's what makes you remarkable." He smiled. "You see clearly because you lived what they've only theorized about. And that clarity is going to change everything." Lyra looked at her sleeping daughter, at this man who had turned her world upside down in the best and most terrifying way, at the impossible future stretching before them. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "Good," he said. "Fear means you understand the weight of what we're trying to do. It's the people who aren't scared that I worry about." And somewhere, in the depths of the palace, the nobles began to plot how to remove this plebeian queen before she could dismantle everything they'd spent centuries building. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, Lyra allowed herself to simply be safe, warm, and surrounded by a family she'd never dared to dream she deserved. The assassination attempt came 3 months later, once the court had fully understood that Lyra wasn't a temporary embarrassment, but a permanent fixture they'd have to tolerate. It happened during a public ceremony, the Spring Blessing, where the royal family traditionally walked among the people to distribute food and blessings. Theron had wanted to cancel, sensing danger, but Lyra had insisted. "I can't hide in the palace forever," she'd said firmly. "Either I'm queen or I'm a prisoner. There's no middle ground." So they went, Thera bundled warmly against Lyra's chest in a carrying wrap, Theron at her side, guards surrounding them. The crowd was massive. Thousands of people from all ranks gathered to witness their controversial queen. Some faces showed genuine warmth, others barely concealed hostility. Most just looked curious, waiting to see if this plebeian-turned royalty would crumble under scrutiny. Lyra moved through them carefully, distributing blessed bread as tradition demanded, accepting flowers and small gifts from children, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. And then she saw the woman. Tall, elegant, with cold eyes and a hand reaching into her cloak in a movement Lyra recognized instinctively. She'd seen that gesture before. Guards reaching for weapons, administrators signaling for violence, the specific body language of someone about to hurt another person. "Theron," she said quietly. But the woman was already moving, fast, too fast. The blade appeared, silver and wickedly sharp, aimed not at Theron or the guards, but directly at Thera. Later, people would say Lyra couldn't possibly have moved as quickly as witnesses claimed. That plebeian omegas without wolves didn't possess that kind of speed or strength, but mother instinct wasn't bound by rank or bloodline. Lyra twisted, putting her body between the blade and her daughter, and felt white-hot pain as steel sliced through her upper arm. She didn't scream, didn't fall, just held Thera tighter and stared at her attacker with absolute fury. "You tried to kill my daughter," she said, her voice preternaturally calm. The woman smiled. "Your bastard has no right to—" She never finished the sentence. Theron's wolf erupted in pure rage, shifting mid-step, and the woman's scream cut off abruptly as jaws closed around her throat. Chaos, guards swarming, people screaming and running, blood pooling on pristine white stone. And Lyra, standing in the center of it all, bleeding but unbroken, her daughter safe against her chest, staring at the body of someone who had wanted her pup dead. Theron shifted back, naked and splattered with blood, his eyes wild. "Lyra, I'm fine," she said automatically, though her arm was screaming and blood soaked through her sleeve. "Thera's fine. We're fine." "You're bleeding." His hands were shaking as he reached for her. "You're hurt. We need to finish the ceremony," Lyra interrupted. She looked around at the terrified crowd, at the faces staring at their blood-stained queen. "We finish what we started, or we let them win by making us afraid." "You've been stabbed," Theron said incredulously. "I've survived worse." She shifted Thera slightly, making sure her daughter was still sleeping peacefully despite the chaos. "Bind my arm, clean the blood, and let's show them that a plebeian queen doesn't run when threatened." The healer who rushed forward bandaged her arm hastily, and Lyra continued through the crowd, distributing bread with one functional arm, accepting blessings, speaking to children, acting as though attempted assassination was merely an inconvenient interruption. People stared, whispered, and slowly, impossibly, began to show something that looked almost like respect. By the time they returned to the palace, Lyra's arm was throbbing with agony and exhaustion threatened to drag her under. But she didn't collapse until the doors closed behind them, until they were safe and private, and she finally let herself feel the terror of how close they'd come to losing everything. "You could have died," Theron said hoarsely, clutching both her and Thera. "That blade could have—" But it didn't. Lyra's voice shook now that she could finally let it. "It didn't because I'm still here, we're still here, and whoever sent that woman—" Her jaw set. "They need to understand that I'm not going anywhere." The investigation revealed that Lady Morgana, the noble who had insulted Lyra at court, had organized the attack. She'd convinced a distant cousin that killing the princess would destabilize Theron's rule, force him to choose a proper mate, restore traditional order. She'd been wrong. Theron exiled her entire family, stripped their titles, redistributed their lands to plebeian families who had been working them for generations without ownership or rights. "You're making enemies," Matthias warned. "Good," Theron replied. "Let them reveal themselves so I know which rotten branches to cut from my court." Over the following weeks, other attempts came. Poison in food that Lyra didn't eat because she was still nursing and couldn't stomach rich meals. A riding accident that would have worked except Lyra had never learned to ride and refused to start. Rumors spread carefully to undermine her authority and paint her as an unfit mother. Each attempt failed, and each time Lyra became more skilled at navigating court politics, more confident in her authority, more certain that she belonged exactly where she was. "You've changed," Cassia said during one of her visits. She'd been brought to the capital as Lyra's personal lady, a reward for her loyalty. "You're stronger, more sure of yourself." "I'm angrier," Lyra corrected. "Anger is easier than fear. And I'm done being afraid of people who think they're better than me just because they were born into comfort I had to claw my way toward." "The queen has teeth," Cassia observed with a smile. "The queen always had teeth," Theron interjected, entering the room. She just had to remember where she'd hidden them. 6 months after the assassination attempt, Lyra announced her first major royal initiative, a complete overhaul of the plebeian labor system, minimum rations guaranteed, protection from physical punishment enshrined in law, educational opportunities for children regardless of rank, paths for social mobility based on merit rather than birth. The nobles revolted. Protests, threats. Dozens of families demanding audience to explain why this was impossible, impractical, economically unfeasible. Lyra heard them all with patient politeness, then announced that any territory failing to comply would be placed under direct royal management, with their administrators replaced by qualified plebeians who understood the needs of their own communities. "You can't do that," one duke sputtered. "The territories have been managed by noble families for centuries. You're disrupting the entire structure of—" "A structure built on suffering," Lyra interrupted calmly. "A structure that requires some people to be treated as disposable so others can maintain luxury. Yes, I'm disrupting it. That's the point." "You're a plebeian yourself," another noble sneered. "You don't understand the complexities of governance, the education required, the strategic thinking." "I understand starvation," Lyra replied. I understand what it feels like to collapse from exhaustion while pregnant and have people step over your body. I understand giving birth alone because no one thought you deserved help. And that education, that experience, makes me infinitely more qualified to govern than someone who's spent their entire life cushioned from consequences." The Duke opened his mouth to argue. Theron's growl shut him up instantly. "The Queen has spoken," Theron said softly, dangerously. "Either adapt or abdicate. Those are your only choices." Slowly, grudgingly, the territories complied. Some because they feared losing their positions. Some because they'd seen what happened to families who opposed the crown. A few, a precious few, because they'd actually listened and understood that change was necessary. A year after Lyra became queen, the first plebeian child entered the Royal Academy on merit-based scholarship. The first plebeian administrator was appointed to a territory council. The first law protecting lower ranks from arbitrary violence passed with overwhelming support after Lyra personally testified about her experiences. "You're building something remarkable," Matthias admitted one evening. The advisor had gone from hostile to grudgingly respectful to, finally, genuinely supportive. Something that might actually last. "I'm building something that should have existed all along," Lyra corrected. "I'm just the first queen who experienced why it needed to exist." That night, alone with Theron and their daughter, now 1 year old and beginning to babble words that sounded almost like Mama and Papa, Lyra finally let herself breathe. "We did it," she said quietly. "You did it," Theron corrected, his arm around her waist. "I just made sure people listened when you spoke." "You did more than that." She looked at him seriously. "You believed me when no one else did. You chose me when it would have been easier to choose tradition. You stood beside me every time someone said I didn't belong." Her voice softened. "You loved me when the world said I wasn't worth loving." "The world was wrong." He kissed her temple. "About all of it, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to anyone stupid enough to doubt you." Thera gurgled happily, reaching for her mother's face with chubby hands. Lyra caught them gently, kissing tiny fingers, marveling that this perfect creature had grown from those desperate months in a canvas shelter. "What do we tell her?" she asked. "When she's old enough to understand, when she asks about where she came from?" Theron considered. "We tell her the truth, that her mother was the bravest person in the realm, that she survived impossible odds because she refused to let the world define what she could be, that she changed an entire kingdom because she remembered what it felt like to be forgotten." "And her father?" Lyra prompted, smiling. "Her father was a fool who almost missed the most important thing in his life because he was too blind to see past tradition." He smiled ruefully. "But he got a second chance, and he made damn sure not to waste it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play, listening to the city beyond their windows, a city slowly learning that strength could look different than they'd been taught, that worth wasn't determined by bloodline, that mercy and justice weren't opposites but partners in building something sustainable. "Do you ever miss it?" Theron asked quietly. The simplicity of the clay pits, before all this. Lyra thought about it honestly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I miss the quiet, the feeling of creating something with my own hands. The days when my biggest worry was meeting quota." She looked at him. "But I don't miss the hunger, the mockery, the absolute certainty that I didn't matter and never would. This," she gestured around them, "this is terrifying and overwhelming and impossibly hard. But I matter here. My voice matters. My experiences matter. And I'm using that to make sure other people know they matter too." "You're extraordinary," he said simply. "I'm angry," she corrected. "And angry women who remember suffering don't give up until something changes." "Then may you stay angry," he said with a smile, "for a very long time." Years later, historians would mark Lyra's reign as the turning point. The moment when the Northern realm began its slow, painful evolution from rigid hierarchy toward something more humane. When plebeians began to have names instead of functions. When children were protected regardless of rank. When a wolfless Omega proved that divine favor had nothing to do with bloodline and everything to do with character. But in that moment, none of that mattered. In that moment, there was just a family, imperfect and unconventional and forged in fire, learning what it meant to build something worth protecting. She had been born in the dust, but the Alpha King had knelt in the dirt to claim what the heavens had written in her womb. And together they'd rewritten the rules that said some lives mattered more than others. They'd proven that mercy wasn't weakness, that compassion wasn't capitulation, that love, fierce, defiant, consciously chosen love, could topple systems that had stood for centuries. The plebeian Omega had been mocked by all, until the Alpha King bowed before her and their unborn pup, until she became the queen who remembered what it meant to suffer and refused to let anyone else endure what she had survived. That was her legacy. That was her revolution. And it had only just begun. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.